The purpose of this presentation is really to raise issues that are very polemical in terms of engaging stakeholders in the area of tobacco harm reduction, and also generally in relation to a number of substance of abuse. For instance, opioid addiction is a hidden pandemic in Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. Cannabis abuse is a real problem throughout the continent, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. The first dilemma is that most governments in tobacco-producing countries benefit from the sales of tobacco. At the same time, they don't want tobacco companies to be involved in supporting scientific research or innovations to check whether some of the tobaccos are helpful or not. Thirdly, in a country like South Africa that's not producing too much tobacco, but is very strong in terms of regulating tobacco, the taxation on tobacco products is very high. But that does not help, that does not stop people from smoking. So the issues that have been raised at a number of forums, there is a regular forum every year in June in Poland, in Warsaw, that deals with the science of nicotine. It's become very clear that most people smoke simply because they enjoy the nicotine effect. At this conference, I've been checking if I have clients who need to stop smoking. I've picked a few Italian friends who disappear every time to go and smoke during lunchtime, during tea breaks, and so on. But they don't seem abnormal to me. They're normal people who enjoy smoking. So the question is, if you're really addicted, if you really cannot function throughout the day because of your smoking habit, can we help you? The help that has been available so far has been in terms of some form of psychotherapy, nicotine patches, or nicotine gums, and so on. But all those things are aimed at providing nicotine in a different way, in a sometimes called safer way, but basically also to stop the craving for actual smoking. So I want to just share a little bit of the harm reduction approach in South Africa that we're trying to position. It's not clearly positioned, but we're trying to use this in comparison with the harm reduction in management of HIV/AIDS, road safety, and so on, to say maybe we should follow evidence-based research to support the approach that says we know that tobacco can be harmful. We know that some people are genetically predisposed to serious lung diseases. Some may have latent cancers, but generally there's a huge story, and the facts are there, that most people with cancer of the lungs have been heavy smokers. There are many people with cancer of the lungs who are not smokers at all, but the majority have cancer of the lungs and other cancers to a lesser extent. If the admissions to the hospitals are because of that, and it's very costly, and science says the alternatives, all people need is nicotine. Can we deliver that nicotine safely? So this conference, the World Congress of Freedom of Scientific Research, has put, from what I heard from yesterday to now, emphasis on the freedom to enjoy the benefits of scientific research, the need to maintain high ethical standards. Even the immediate last speaker talked about ethical issues. I think there's no single speaker who has not addressed ethical issues. There's need to share information. This issue of sharing information is important. When Margaret spoke earlier this morning about experience in Kenya, it was very clear that the way they package information and the way they share it with politicians is very strategic, it's very clearly workshopped, and they know what to say. But you have to share the information. Otherwise, if you do research and you leave it in your office or in your library, but you don't share it with parliamentarians, they will say they don't know. That's why this was not budgeted for. There's need to train others in science research methodology. This question came up yesterday, and I think it's crucial that we should continue to train people in science methodology. There must be readiness to have your views or findings challenged. There's one critical issue. Most scientists are very individualistic, they're very egoistic, they feel they know it all, and they don't want their views to be challenged. I think in the scientific world, you know that you are dealing with a moving target. Your finding may be A today, but tomorrow or a week later it may be B. Be brave enough to go back to the parliamentarians and say, we have looked at the data again, but we think the scenario presented to you has shifted because of factor A, B, and C. The parliamentarians will appreciate your honesty, and that form of engagement opens you to a more regular interaction with them so that they may ultimately be dispelled of some of the perceptions. So when you deal with these perceptions, you may find that the questions that come from parliamentarians, and I wish to really commend the parliamentarians on the panel yesterday because some of the things I'm saying here, they've said. I chair the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Mental Health, so from time to time I have to sit with the minister and advise him on the mental health scenario in South Africa and in most African countries that I have visited as the president of the African Association of Psychiatrists. But they ask questions. Are you saying nicotine on its own is harmless? There's a debate about this. What you do know now is nicotine is not causing problems that some of the heavy smokers do have. But what major problem it causes is relevant to me in psychiatry. It's addiction. If you go to any chronic psychiatric ward, the patients want to smoke and smoke and smoke. To the extent that some countries have had some trials, the UK, for instance, provide alternative methods of delivering nicotine to some patients in certain hospitals in the form of e-cigarettes. And those patients seem to do better. Why spend so much money developing different ways of delivering nicotine? There's a question that parliamentarians will always pose to pharmaceutical companies who believe that their products are better. Is this about glamorizing smoking? There's a big question also. You'll remember that the product called Juul, J-U-U-L, in the United States created problems, but they found that the problems were more because of the flavored part or forms of Juul, and which was very attractive to young adolescents and so on. But there were also deaths associated with certain vaping instruments, and they found that the youngsters or the people who died were not just using cigarettes, but whatever was being vaped included other additives such as cannabis and so on, which reacted negatively with ordinary cigarette. Is this not a gateway to ordinary smoking and access to harder drugs? Now, point is, can you just start by using alternative ways of getting nicotine and therefore become a drug addict of sorts? This gateway theory has not been proven. Why do you resist regulation by governments? This question is asked by most parliamentarians or governments because many companies say they can regulate themselves better. But today, the state of things is that companies are saying, no, we still want government to be involved, but we want government not to be too strict. For instance, the previous Minister of Health in South Africa felt anything you smoke is smoking. He didn't care whether it's ordinary tobacco or e-cigarettes, heat-not-burn products, and so on. And so they were regulated similarly. Therefore, they were taxed similarly. But the companies were saying, no, these are the methods that we use to reduce mortality. You won't have too many admissions because of lung infections, pneumonias, or cancers of the lung, and so on. So tax them less because they're interventions, they're a form of therapy. They're not ordinary tobacco. And they base this on the fact that when you burn tobacco, in that smoke, there are 700 to 1,000 toxins that are possibly carcinogenic. But if you use these alternative methods, you've removed most of those toxins. And then, of course, smart guys will say, these toxins that are used, these cigarettes, heat-not-burn, you have to warm a metal, copper can be released, and this and that. Scientists are saying, yes, but the amount of copper or other elements that are released by the heat, it's minuscule, it's very small, compared to the number of carcinogens you find in burning ordinary tobacco. So this basically means you have to prepare information very well. The WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control appears to be restrictive, and WHO is very strict on this, but it's not anti-science. It says let's have tested and proven science. Let's have more studies. Let's consider views of researchers worldwide, but caution against quick promotion of untested innovations. So you have to be striking the balance between the interest of researchers and the profit approach of tobacco companies. And this seems to be the key issue, because no company will invest money without looking at profit. Every company must have some profit. Scientists have to be brave in providing guidance in the best interest of humanity. I don't think anyone would go out there, do extensive research, only to kill people. I think you have to be able to do that. If you look at general medicine, psychiatry, and so on, major innovations were driven by support that came from pharmaceutical companies, although, of course, at the end, they also have their profit. But some of the things were pushed by action campaigns from the public or various communities. The key decision makers in this area of tobacco harm reduction, the ministries of health, ministries of finance, who control the purse. In the USA, is the FDA, WHO is central, and of course, there are various other groups such as the Center for Tobacco Control and Cancer Associations. I've just listed some of them. You'll see them on the slides. Key in the slide is the Cancer Association, not just in South Africa, but worldwide, and the various national councils against smoking, and various tobacco action groups. Now, the problem with these tobacco action groups is they simply criticize pharmaceutical companies, but they don't offer alternatives in most cases. That is a problem. We want them to offer alternatives. So the concerns that WHO has about smoking are that 1 in 3 adults are smokers, 1.1 billion smoke tobacco on each day. China being the largest producer and consumer of cigarettes, tobacco kills half of its consumers within a lifetime. It doesn't say it kills everyone, half. So that's a significant percentage. The addictive culprit of tobacco is nicotine. Nicotine addiction is common in general population and in mentally ill patients. Nicotine reaches the brain cells within 8 seconds of smoking and thus delivers desired effect or calmness within minutes. That is why we've heard or seen some of our colleagues here going out to smoke. They need the smoke to feel better or feel a little calm or to relax. I will not go into this whole slide about harm reduction, but the principles are that harm reduction, you're introducing something that is likely to do harm. It's not necessarily going to stop people from using the substance, but you want to deliver the substance in a manner that is less harmful, in this case, nicotine. There is a background here of various inputs from international structures. I can just read 1 or 2 things here. WHO says, look, we hear you, but let's do more research. Professor Nat and other people in their study there, they say there are people who are tempted to switch on their own from combustible cigarettes that you burn to non-combustibles, but they were having difficulties until they were introduced to e-cigarettes or heat-not-burn products. The Cancer Research in the UK in 2014 made a statement that all this is wonderful, but we need more research to prove that people who are using e-cigarettes or heat-not-burn products are not prone to cancer in the same way as those who use raw tobacco. So there is really a problem with consensus on harm reduction potential around these issues. This is where the strategy becomes important on how to engage stakeholders. Margaret mentioned some of these issues. You've got to package your information in a confident way. You've got to be open to criticism, and you have to have clear, end products. These are some examples. Please, you can read this. The examples, you'll find this explanations of these products in the slides. Basically, one of the products, you hit the cigarette, you don't burn it. And then the vapor that comes out goes through a particular element, and it's nicotine only is singled out. So that's cleaner nicotine. You have not burned, you have not smoked the whole thing that has more than 700 carcinogens. The principles for all of them is the same, although they are wired differently. So the key facts to note, therefore, about these methods of electronically delivering nicotine is that the consumer product is not medicinal approach. Some people thought this could be medicinal. It's not. Avoidance of smoking cessation claims, for instance, there are many countries where these products are available also have, in conjunction to delivering these substances, smoking cessation clinics where intensive psychotherapy can be given to assist whoever wants to stop smoking. Hence, regulation should not be modeled on tobacco product regulation. I've already talked about that. Companies are saying, do not compare ordinary tobacco with things that are going to reduce harm. So these are just a repetition of global studies. Please feel free to read them. The case in South Africa is that we have a huge number of people who smoke. 31,000 South Africans are killed annually by tobacco-caused diseases, not just cancer, it could be chronic lung disease and so on. More than 343,000 children and 5 million adults use tobacco each day. Some use what they call smokeless tobacco. In Sweden, you know that this is snus you put under the tongue and you suck out the nicotine. So the principles of harm reduction come into play, but the main thing here is to recognize that these are based on an attempt to reduce harm. If you are lucky, you can stop harm completely, because some people do quit. You can study this map on the slides. It gives you a distribution of intravenous drug usage and how the world tried to deal with harm reduction. And this is important. For instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Africa in particular, we went through a period when there was resistance to the introduction of antiretroviral medication. But after more and more scientific evidence was presented to the leaders, we started spending more and more money in purchasing these antiretroviral drugs, to the extent that we do know that some of our neighboring countries come once a month to South Africa to collect the medication and take back home because they cannot get it in their countries. It is free in South Africa. So we also know from the road accidents that we have, there was no debate about using safety belts in cars because evidence had been put across, and this shaped policy that every country now insists that you must use a safety belt when you're driving, and also including your passengers when you're on motorbike and so on. And we are saying, with the use of tobacco, let's approach it similarly and reduce harm. Let's reduce the admissions in the hospitals, and let's try and save humanity. So hence regulation is not a standalone issue. The tobacco heat products must be regulated. We think government still has to enforce this, because if you don't, then you're going to have to compete with illicit cigarettes. And that is more dangerous because you don't know what's in there. So really, to summarize some of the key issues, including some of the things that were mentioned yesterday, evidence-based policy is not policy-biased evidence-seeking. It has to assert importance of scientific evidence. It should not be ideological in motive. There must be some balance, individual and population-based science, ensuring the independence of scientists, proper handling of uncertainty, ensuring transparency of scientific advice, appropriate use of a precautionary principle. This issue of transparency is important. Many researchers are even afraid to say, I've received funding from company A, which is a tobacco company, because WHO and other structures will say, don't take their money. But then governments are not giving you money to do the research. It's a bit of a difficult situation, but we do get information. So there are some important conclusions in terms of population effects. E-cigarette use is prevalent mostly in smokers or ex-smokers, minimal use by never smokers, mostly trial experimentation. Daily use and nicotine use are virtually non-existent among never smokers. It's not a gateway approach. The effect on dual users depends on the amount of smoking reduction. So some people flip-flop. They get into smoking, they get out. So the companies and the researchers they use are saying the use of heat-not-burn products or electronic cigarettes helps them to negotiate that flip. So I really want to thank you for listening. I just raised this question because I belong to many international and local associations of psychiatry. but we don't discuss smoking or tobacco very much. It's almost like it's outside, our mental health field. But we do know people smoke because they have a high level of anxiety. Some of them have social phobia, others are depressed, and they want to get a quick fix to feel better and so on. Some cannot concentrate, but when they smoke, they feel they can concentrate a little longer. Now, are there no ways of helping those people do the good things without smoking, without dependence on nicotine? We believe there are. And personally, I don't necessarily support any of the companies or promote these e-cigarettes or heat-not-burn products totally. But I'm saying governments and parliamentarians must think about alternatives, because the fact that tobacco is harmful, it doesn't kill you now, but it may kill you at some point or make your life miserable. It makes you also be a bit nasty when you are next to other people. If in smoking, you smell. But if you use e-cigarettes, there's no smell. Your wife can hug you at least without feeling that she's going to be getting secondary smoking. So there are some improvements. People who have chronic lung disease and smoking, when they stop smoking, use these products, they feel better. They can walk longer distances. They can put more effort in their day to work. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Solomon. I think we will keep perhaps questions all to the very end. I invite